In many ways, God of War Ragnarok feels like the game that people claimed God of War 2018 to be. While I thoroughly enjoyed the reboot, many of the Game of the Year nods at that time just felt off to me, especially in a year that featured Red Dead Redemption 2. A story about father and son coming closer together was often hampered by plot contrivances, while the smaller scale narrative clashed with what God of War had always been about. These issues persisted even when revisiting the game earlier this year. By the way, check out that video for my full thoughts on it. Anyway, it just left me wanting more. I wanted the bigger scale. I wanted the world-ending consequences. And I wanted more from the Norse pantheon. God of War Ragnarok promised to deliver on this front, and I'm happy to report that it certainly does. If you share in my sentiment, you won't be disappointed. Hell, you might even find yourself appreciating the efforts of the 2018 title even more from playing this one. I know I certainly am. Still, Ragnarok is the better game between the two. Many of the issues from the first title in both the narrative and gameplay have been cleaned up and improved, so look forward to that. Anyway, these opening statements have read a lot more like a conclusion versus an introduction, but that's because this video will be filled with spoilers. So if you haven't played this game or haven't finished it yet, please do so before continuing. If you trust my opinion without context, then go ahead and get this game. It's quality. For the rest of you, let's press onward and explore what makes God of War Ragnarok a bigger and better experience than the original. For as cliche as that might sound, I think it's an appropriate way to describe this latest entry in one of Sony's biggest franchises. As you will come to see throughout the course of this video, God of War Ragnarok improves on nearly all the complaints leveled against the 2018 reboot. It's like the developers heard exactly what players didn't enjoy about that title and fixed it, while maintaining what made it so enjoyable in the first place. Whether it was issues with the camera, pitiful enemy variety, a smaller scaled story, or the lack of Asgard's mightiest champions, it doesn't matter what annoyed players, it's pretty much been fixed here. The only thing you won't find that many fans have wondered about is a further exploration of Kratos' past. In particular, what those visions of Athena and Zeus from the first game were all about. And while that may sound disappointing on paper, in practice it was something that didn't even faze me as I played through the game. And that's surprising because it felt like such an important topic for the original game to gloss over. But now, having completed Ragnarok, I really don't care. I don't care how Kratos got here. I'm just enjoying what this story was. And that's because what they've crafted here lures you in by introducing the most powerful gods of these lands and finding ways to characterize and humanize them in ways the Greek games could never fathom. And it does this while maintaining the very personal touch felt in the 2018 game. It's really incredible. Conversely though, God of War Ragnarok borrows a lot of its gameplay beats from the last game, which makes sense, but it leaves very little to discuss when it comes to this title, despite it being a crowning achievement for the series, perhaps even outdoing God of War 3. I mean, not for me, I love God of War 3, it's still my favorite in the series, and I might even put the original God of War from way back when on PS2 above this one, but it'd be close. Still, with Ragnarok, you won't find any earth-shattering mechanics, or new twist on the genre, or fresh storytelling ideas, or anything revolutionary. Instead, you'll receive a damn good sequel that can be enjoyed by many. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. Not every game needs to reset the industry. It just means that many of my positive thoughts from the 2018 title carry over here. So let's dive in, and please remember, massive spoilers ahead from here on out. So let's get started. I've decided to start this review off by analyzing the story, because to me, that's what Ragnarok is all about. The narrative. Let the unskippable cutscenes and vast amount of dialogue be evidence enough of that. That's pessimistic, but I don't mean for it to sound that way, because Ragnarok is able to continue the story of Kratos and Atreus, developing their relationship further, while also introducing new plot elements that raise the stakes, not only for our heroes, but every character within this universe. It's really the best of both worlds. It all kicks off with Kratos and Atreus returning from a hunt in the wintry realm of Midgard. It's clear that Fimbulwinter, the precursor to Ragnarok within Norse mythology, has been active for a few years now. Snow covers every inch of landscape, signaling the beginning of the end, and it's been all drummed up after your slaughtering of Baldur during the previous game's conclusion. This title wastes no time getting into the thick of things, as the relatively quiet opening hour of the previous game is replaced with a jam-packed romp featuring the mightiest of Vanir and Asgardian gods. Freya, still vengeful over her son's death, attacks you on your way home. Kratos and Atreus just barely escape her, only to be greeted by Thor and Odin, waiting for them at their cozy cabin. The All-Father offers peace, citing that past grievances will be forgiven if the two sides agree to never interfere with each other again. And Kratos, true to his character, responds to Odin's request by saying this.
No.
This rejection leads to a blood battle with Thor, as the god of thunder seeks retribution for the death of his sons. He and Kratos duke it out until a stalemate is reached when Kratos' Leviathan axe freezes Thor's lightning bolt, creating an everlasting symbol of their ferocious clash. All of this happens within the opening hour, and I glossed over the part where Atreus transforms into a bear. Yeah. Damn, it does a lot to really get the blood boiling. Already, we're getting what was missing from the previous game. While this opening hour thrills, I don't really want to continue on with the recap much farther than that. I mostly wanted to point out how different the opening hour of this game is from the previous, because it's quite drastic, but I don't really want to go through this game plot beat by plot beat. Instead, I want to explore the bigger ideas and concepts. To do that, let's acknowledge that the first 2/3 of this game are about going out on awesome adventures through the 9 realms, slowly building up the doom and gloom that a setting like Ragnarok provides, while also continuing to develop Kratos and Atreus' relationship. Then, during the final third of the game, the story begins to focus more, exploring the theme of free will versus predestination, the concepts of fate and prophecy, as well as bringing resolution to many character arcs kicked off in the previous game, as well as this one. And all the while, the biggest question of this reboot series lingers over your head. Will Kratos' death prophecy come true? Only time will tell. Primarily though, this game is still about Kratos and Atreus, both on an individual level as well as their connection as father and son. That's a respectable overview of what God of War Ragnarok is about. So now, let's explore these ideas in further detail. Santa Monica Studios planned for this title to be the final entry in the Norse saga. Knowing this, they wanted to jam-pack as many Norse myths into the game as possible, knowing they wouldn't get another chance to do so. In the main quest, this plays out in the number of adventures that you have. While each mission may advance the overall plot and further the relationship between father and son, it's also just about doing something really fucking cool within one of the 9 realms. For example, one mission sees Kratos and Atreus traveling to Helheim to stop a rampaging dog named Garm from ripping dimensional holes through the realms. And then there's this one, where Kratos travels to Svartalheim to turn Draupnir, the multiplying ring, into a weapon to be used against the Aesir. Or there's this mission, where Kratos and Freya meet up with the Norns, the fates of these realms, in an attempt to learn more about the giant's prophecy. And there's plenty more like this. Each of them just sounds so cool when they're introduced, and then they go on to be outstanding missions. I mean, go save Tyr, the badass god of war from the previous game? Yeah, sign me up. These, along with some of the side missions, allow for Santa Monica Studios to touch on some of the Norse mythologies that are most prominent, and the characters and concepts that accompany them. It felt like something that was lacking from the previous game. These may take a backseat to the character drama and Doomsday plot, but it's important to acknowledge how well these mission objectives lend credibility to this world, helping to build it up while exploring some of the greatest Norse hits. Speaking of those side quests though, I do think it's important to make this note on them here in the story section. Ragnarok has more side content than the previous game, but I suspect many players will mainline the campaign before touching much of it. I took the time to complete around half the game's side content for this review, and while many of these missions were fleshed out and interesting, it just felt like the wrong time to be doing it. I mean, you have these events that seem to take precedent, like the world ending, or Atreus being in some unknown location. And it just feels weird to be messing around looking for the source of some earthquakes, or freeing some big jellyfish from underground, when those other, way more important things are at hand. There's a dissonance created from the notion that Kratos would spend time doing all these minor tasks when there's more pressing matters at hand. This is true even despite the game's efforts to justify you taking breaks through dialogue. There's times where Kratos will claim to be doing this stuff because he wants to spend more time with his son. It might make sense from a story standpoint, but for the player, it feels natural to beeline the main story and come back to the side content later. This same feeling affected the 2018 title as well. And that's fine, the side content will wait for you. But it just felt off when some characters would essentially say, hey, yeah, now's a good time to just forget about all that Ragnarok business. Yeah, let's go over there and do that side quest with that ghost guy. Yeah, that's what we should be doing right now.
I'd particularly appreciate us checking out the mining rigs in the lake to the right. You can see the smokestacks from here.
But if you don't want to explore now, it looks like Derlin's place is through that open gate to the left.
However, no matter what you're doing or which characters accompany you, the story is constantly developing the relationship between Kratos and Atreus. While great strides were taken to build their connection in the previous game, it's clear that issues still divide father and son. In particular, the giant's prophecy and the threat of Ragnarok weighs heavily on Atreus' mind, while his father's focus is on shielding his son away from all of it because of the threat it could pose. Atreus has a natural curiosity about it all and is unable to let it go, despite his father's wishes for them to live a peaceful life spent training in the woods. In the first half of this game, this divide splits the two apart. Literally, Atreus goes against his father's wishes and departs on missions solo or alongside Sindri. This results in gameplay sequences where you play as Atreus, but more on that later. His first real solo outing leads him to Jotunheim, where he meets Angerboda, one of the last living giants whose purpose is to shepherd Loki through Ragnarok. And I'm sure you remember Atreus as Loki. It's here where Atreus learns of the prophecy predicting his father's death and his eventual allegiance with Odin. Atreus attempts to avoid fate and prophecy, but as we learned from Freya in the first game, this often puts you on that path instead of one that avoids it. So, Atreus decides to work alongside of Odin, but only in an attempt to garner his trust so that it can be used against him later, while simultaneously he can learn more about the All-Father's plan. Meanwhile, Kratos is attempting to overcome his struggle as a parental figure. He, like many parents, have a great apprehensiveness about accepting their child's coming of age. He still views Atreus as being not ready for the dangers of the real world, and attempts to shield him away from everything. despite the fact that Atreus and all children must walk their own path someday. Reaching the point where he fully trusts and respects his son's choices is the growth arc that Kratos walks during this title, and it's handled very well, with much less plot contrivances and cliches than in the 2018 game. It all feels more natural, as the events of the game, paired up with the guiding wisdom from Mimir, allow for Kratos' shift to feel believable and wholesome. Wholesome. That's not a word you'd associate with Kratos very often, but it for sure works here. During the first half or 2/3 of the game, this is the conflict that defines the relationship between the two. Kratos wants to hover over his son, unwilling to respect his individuality, while Atreus wants to carve his own path, one that sheds the prophecy. I remember watching the God of War 2018 documentary entitled Raising Kratos, and in it, game director Cory Barlog describes how his own experience as a parent influenced the story of that game. Despite Barlog moving down to creative director this time around, it isn't hard to see that same influence at work. The heart and soul of this story is about the parents' struggle to let go of the control they have over their child's life as they age. Only when Kratos accepts Atreus for the man he is becoming do things begin to change. The love and connection forged between the two in the 2018 title is only enhanced further once trust and respect is introduced into the mix. After nearly losing Atreus to Odin, Kratos' disposition towards his son changes immensely, as he comes to realize that Atreus will act on his own free will, and the best thing that he can do as a parent is to allow it, while walking side by side with his son, supporting him rather than leading him. This realization comes in a very sweet and touching moment in Helheim, which is weird of all places, but it's from here where their relationship has become mended completely. Of course, there's still the threat of Ragnarok, and that pesky death prophecy still hanging over their heads. So yeah, that's like the first 2/3 of the game, going through that conflict and reaching a point of resolution. Of course, before we get to that final confrontation, it's also important to acknowledge how much work the game puts in to develop other characters and perspectives within this narrative. A lot has gone into furthering the character arcs of Freya, Brock, and Sindri through interactions with Kratos and Atreus, as well as new characters like Luda, Freyr, and more. What surprised me though was that my most disliked character from the previous game, Sindri, got a lot better in this game. They ditched his unfunny germophobia spiel and replaced it with genuine character development. I mean, I was blown away. I thought there was no redeeming this character, but God of War Ragnarok, I'm like, wow, I actually like Sindri now. I didn't think they could do it, but they did. This same level of care and detail has also gone into developing the game's main antagonists, Odin and Thor. Unlike in the original God of War trilogy, where the gods were just evil because they were evil, a lot has gone into exploring the motivations of these Aesir baddies, in terms of their background and their actual relationships. You'll spend more time alongside of Odin's family than you might have imagined going into the experience. Atreus' curiosity and attempts to stop fate lead him down a route where he works alongside of the Aesir to try to trick them. This means spending time with Thor and his daughter Thrud as you venture through Muspelheim, Niflheim, and Helheim in search of mask fragments. You'll also get to know other characters like Heimdall, who very well might be my favorite villain in any game this year. He was just so compelling to me. Despite not getting a ton of screen time, every time he was on screen I just felt like he dominated it. Interestingly enough, they even channeled The Last of Us Part 2 a bit by attempting to show the perspective of the Aesir. I mean, perhaps Odin isn't so bad after all, because here he is, walking through his village, and you see, maybe he's not so bad. They try to show the good side of him. This of course gives way eventually, as Odin is revealed to be a huge POS, but at least they offer up his perspective for the player to consider, making him much more interesting. And even more impressive is Thor. You get to see the pain caused to him and his family through the slaughtering of his 2 sons. It sends him into a vicious cycle of alcoholism, but he's eventually able to redeem himself by standing up against Odin. They do a fantastic job of humanizing these villains. I didn't see it coming, but you get to learn their perspective in this game, and it made it all the better. But anyway, back to Kratos and Atreus. After overcoming their divide, their focus turns to Ragnarok. This is where the game does a really interesting study of free will versus predeterminism. Is everything that happens destined to happen because we are slaves to our nature, which then informs our choices? Or do we actually have free will, the ability to choose for ourselves regardless of our nature? If you knew every single detail about a person's life, their upbringing, their thoughts, their behaviors, and their DNA, could you predict every single choice they'd make with accuracy? These are the sorts of questions that God of War Ragnarok alludes to as Kratos and Atreus attempt to break the prophecy depicting the father's demise. By trying to avoid this fate, do Kratos and Atreus accidentally walk into it? It's certainly something we saw happen with Freya in the first game. By attempting to avoid the needless death of her son, she actually put that path in motion by trying to stop it. That, along with Faye's correct predictions about her husband and son's journey in the first game, lends background information that influences the player's perspectives during this game. In other words, so far, fate has been right. It puts this uneasiness in the back of the player's mind. Kratos is such a beloved character, and by continuing to play, are we, the player, setting the course for his death in the same way that Freya did for Baldur? It's a compelling thought that endures throughout the experience. This is especially true as Kratos and Atreus' actions in the game seem to align with the prophecy even further. Atreus ventures to Asgard and aids Odin just how the fates predicted. Meanwhile, they also predicted Kratos' slaughtering of Heimdall, which is something that comes true as well. And that's an incredible adrenaline-filled fight, by the way, my favorite in the game, owed to the action as well as the narrative stakes. Just a really well done fight.
He left me no choice.
Because it was necessary, not because it was written.
Anyway, this theme is put to the test in the final showdown at Ragnarok, as a souped-up Surtur slams into the heart of Asgard alongside of Kratos, Atreus, Freya, Mimir, and the gang. The player's heart is thumping hard at this point due to the incredible visuals, crazy action, high stakes, and that lingering question in the back of your mind. Will Kratos die? How will it happen? At this point, I was so sucked into the predeterminism theme that I fully anticipated this beloved character to perish. What can I say? They got me. Kratos seems to single-handedly change fate when he encourages Atreus to open his heart to the pain and suffering of those around him, because allowing him to feel and connect is what makes him a better person than his father. And that's always been Kratos' goal, to make sure that Atreus is better than him. It's crazy because one of the last lessons Kratos imparts on his son is the complete opposite of one of the very first messages he delivers in the 2018 title.
Close your heart to it. On our journey, we will be attacked by all manner of creature. Close your heart to their desperation. Close your heart to their suffering. Do not allow yourself to feel for them. They will not feel for you.
I understand.
It's one of many successful callbacks in this game. And by sharing this sentiment with his son, and even adapting it into his own perspective, fate seems to be averted. The final confrontation with Thor ends not with violence and death, as it so often does for Kratos, but instead it ends with words, dialogue, and an understanding between fathers. It's the shiniest moment of growth for Kratos in a game full of them. I love it. It feels like the payoff this entire Norse duology has been building to, and it gives way to an epic showdown with Odin, culminating with the death of the brutal Norse god and fate averted by father and son. Despite building up fear for Kratos' death for the first 90% of the game, ultimately, Santa Monica Studios sides with free will in its debate versus predeterminism. The game sides with the more uplifting notion that we as humans can choose to be better, to change our nature, and to grow. It's a beautiful sentiment, especially for a character like Kratos who has endured so much pain and suffering through seeking vengeance. He finally redeems himself and finds peace knowing that he's turned the corner from his previous life. And it's all done naturally and patiently, which balances the journey wonderfully. But it's not all about Kratos, as Atreus himself experiences a true coming-of-age story, coming into his own while not abandoning the relationship that has got him this far. When you consider the game is trying to pay off both of these characters individually, as well as their shared relationship, it's impressive that they were able to do justice to all of it, because that's a lot to have on your plate, especially if you're just the writing team. So kudos to them. I think they did a killer job. God of War Ragnarok is able to tell a more heartfelt and naturally flowing story with a better payoff, while also elevating the stakes immensely over the previous game. I mean, that's just incredible. I can't believe they actually did it, but they did. As a final note in this story section, which I know has been a little bit all over the place, but that's just how my thoughts were on this one, I do wonder how a parallel version where Kratos dies would fare. I wonder how that game would be received. While I'm content with the game's ending, even satisfied really, there's a small part of me that would have liked to see this franchise be put to rest here. It feels like Kratos' story arc is wrapped up beautifully here, even if he had perished. I almost hope they let him rest for a while, as I don't really feel the need to see this character go to Egypt or Celtic lands to fight their gods. He's reached a good point, and although it saddens me to say this, I think this is a good place to halt the franchise, perhaps forever. Let that be a statement towards the quality of this game's narrative. They've achieved something really special here, at least in my eyes. Hell, I wrote 5 pages simply about its overarching ideas, and my baseline thoughts. Imagine if I had gone into much more detail. Instead, I'll leave those details aside for you to uncover if you somehow watch this video before playing the game. It's still worth experiencing for yourself, so go ahead and do it. When it comes to gameplay in Ragnarok, imagine taking the combat from God of War 2018 and kind of nudging it forward. It's the next logical step, but it's certainly that. A step, not a leap. And that's fine because of how visceral the slaughtering is and how many choices you have at your disposal. Returning are the Blades of Chaos and the Leviathan Axe, each equipped with new skill trees and moves for you to unlock. I missed some of my combos and runic attacks at first, but the new options pleasantly fill their place, although it was strange to spend the first 30 to 50% of this game without a heavy runic attack for my axe. Not sure why it took so long to find one, that was dumb. But anyway, having these weapons back was immediately satisfying and provided a lot of joy to wield again, especially against lower leveled enemies who didn't require me to just spam my runic attacks for victory. This allowed me to get into a cool flow where I mixed and matched basic attacks, combos, and runics to create a nice looking ballet of destruction. The combat animations do a lot of work in making fights so visually satisfying, and paired up with the cool but varied weapons, it's a recipe for success just as much as it was in 2018. Entering the fray this time around is a third weapon, a Spartan Spear. In his quest to defeat Heimdall, Kratos and Brock travel to Svartalfheim, where a mermaid blacksmith crafts them this trick weapon. I didn't find it as satisfying to use as the axe or blades, but it was still a fine inclusion. Basically, it's best used to posture break enemies, as its rapid strikes can build up their meter quickly. It's also another source of big damage due to the extra runic attacks it provides. There's also some range utility with it too, as you can throw spears into enemies and then explode them for extra damage. I did still find the Leviathan axe to be the more responsive throwable weapon though, but at least it gave the spear a little something extra to consider. Moving on, my biggest complaint, as well as many others, towards the combat in the 2018 title was the camera, or more specifically, how incoming damage was portrayed. The alert reticle they used wasn't always the easiest to keep an eye on during the heat of battle, but I'm happy to say that I think this issue has been fixed greatly in Ragnarok. It's not perfect, but it's better. The indicators stood out to me more visually, and the camera is pulled back a little bit extra, giving you more room to see enemies entering the frame. It also felt like the companions called out incoming attacks more frequently in this title, but I can't say for sure. Either way, these three things combined, and it just felt like they addressed the issue here, and it felt a lot better. Of course, the other big complaint lobbied at God of War's combat was the enemy and boss variety. To put it simply, this issue is corrected in God of War Ragnarok. There's no debate. There's just so many more enemies here. Some are repeated, but they're intermingled enough that they don't feel stale. Of course, the change is felt even more when it comes to boss design. There's a lot of new ones, both mini-bosses as well as spectacle fights during the main campaign. To me, these were severely lacking in God of War 2018, and that issue has been addressed wholeheartedly. How, in the opening few hours, you take on a bunch of new bosses. It's like the developers saying, yeah, we heard ya, and we listened. On top of these corrections, the RPG elements have also gained a few extra layers here in Ragnarok. There's more skill trees to consider, as you can now upgrade individual skills. There's also just more things to consider. Amulets, runic attacks, armor loadouts, skill unlocks, a new companion, and more. But to be quite honest, many of these more fine-tuned min-max elements can go ignored by the average player, who's just looking to finish up the campaign. These are mostly tacked on for players wanting to complete all the content on higher difficulties, forcing them to squeeze every advantage they can from the numbers. In a casual playthrough, you won't bother with it much. At least I certainly didn't. I just focused on keeping everything upgraded, whether it was skills, armor, or weapons, and that was more than enough to get through the game on the normal difficulty. There are some other notable changes to combat, so let's reel through them. These include new charged attacks, where Kratos can hold triangle to imbue the blades with flame, the axe with ice, or the spear with, light energy? I don't know what this is, but I use these a little bit, but normally stopping my onslaught to charge them up felt kind of pointless, so I didn't use them a lot. They were a pace breaker. The Spartan Rage mode has also been expanded, as Kratos now has 3 modes of rage to access. Returning from 2018 is the ability to enter Rage mode, doing a ton of damage to enemies in the process. However, there's also now a mode that allows you to restore a chunk of your health, and another that deals an incredible amount of damage to a single enemy in one blow. For me, once I unlocked the health perk, I used it exclusively, as it allowed me to play Kratos how I enjoy most: reckless. I was able to carve through enemies, ripping them apart in brutal fashion, using the health boost to offset any damage I took from tanking hits instead of blocking. And there's also some new shields to consider as well, which are upgradable this time around. Oh, and I should note that the design of combat arenas has also been expanded on. There's much more verticality in some of them, encouraging Kratos to move around more, which divides up enemies, making it less likely that you'll take that blind damage. It's also important to note that companions are once again an important part of the combat equation. Atreus returns as your primary helper. He's able to shoot arrows and use a runic summon to bring forth even more help. On top of that, Freya will occasionally slot into Atreus' place after her and Kratos fix their relationship during a trip to Vanaheim. She basically handles the same as Atreus and will actually stay as your permanent companion after the credits roll. Of course, these two aren't the only companions, as sometimes Brok and Sindri will accompany you as well. Brok helps out Kratos while they journey to build the spear, and as for Sindri, well, that brings us to perhaps the most notable change to gameplay within this title. For the first time, Atreus is playable in God of War Ragnarok. You can't switch to him at any time, but he has his own meaty sections to complete, some lasting a few hours. I'd say you'll spend a good 30% of the main story playing as Atreus, which is nothing to scoff at. Mechanically, he functions like a weaker version of Kratos with more ranged options because of his bow. He has basic attacks to accompany those arrows, along with runic attacks, and the ability to transform into a wolf or a bear when utilizing Spartan Rage. He is often accompanied by Sindri as a companion, but there will be times when Thor and Thrud venture with him as well. To be honest, as I played, I worried that Atreus would somehow become the default character you play as in the postgame, since I thought Kratos would die. But as I look back, I realize how silly this would be, given how Kratos' weapons are tied directly into puzzle solving. So, if they killed Kratos, you wouldn't be able to go back and do everything that you didn't do during the main story after you finish it up. So, in a way, it almost spoiled that he would live. I guess it is what it is. Anyway, I'm glad they didn't go down that route, because playing as Atreus, while tolerable, just isn't as satisfying as playing as Kratos. The raw rage and aggression that the series was founded on is pretty much lost during these sections. And I'd argue that that's one of the most important elements this reboot duology needed to maintain from the original games. The violence. They certainly do that when you play as Kratos. As they are now, the Atreus sections are fine. They're close enough to Kratos' style and spread out enough that you can tolerate them and even enjoy them a bit. They're aided by the fact that many of his sections feature gripping plot elements, mostly through the introduction and expansion of new characters, like Angerboda, Thor, Odin, and Thrud. So yeah, overall, the combat in Ragnarok is exactly what you'd expect. More of the 2018 title with a few extra helpings of good stuff. However, fighting isn't the only thing you'll be doing in this game. Levels often contain your standard short walking paths for dialogue to take place, but there's also branches that lead to puzzles. Some are mandatory, some are not. It feels like there's more here in Ragnarok, although that may be due to the game being longer than the original. Anyway, those mandatory puzzles. I've seen a lot of people talking online about how fast the companions are to spoil some of them for you. And they're absolutely right. These companions will not shut up. Instead, they will give you step-by-step instructions within seconds of entering a puzzle area, especially after doing one or two incorrect actions. A puzzle's point is defeated when it is explained to you step by step, without giving you the chance to think. My belief is that Santa Monica Studios knew that these have always been a part of the series, serving as a pacing tool to give the player downtime, and have felt compelled to include them. However, they also recognize that it's the least interesting component of a God of War game. Players are here for the combat and the narrative, and getting stuck on these for a long period of time is frustrating and defeats the point of the game. That's why I'm ultimately okay with the inclusion of the help, although the option to turn puzzle hints off would have been nice. To me, the eye-rolling nuisance that occurs every time a companion tries to help you on a puzzle that's easily solvable outweighs the annoyance that would come from getting stuck not knowing what to do, when I just want to see the next cutscene or disembowel the next Draugr. As for the side puzzles, the ones that reward health and Spartan Rage upgrades, you won't get much in the way of help. If you don't have all the tools to access the puzzle yet, you'll be told that, but outside of this, it's up to you. And that's just hilarious to me because they're so fast to solve the mainline puzzles for you, the ones you have to do, but the side ones, they are absolutely silent. It's like, what are you doing? You broken over there? Come on, show me how to open this chest. Where's that damn other fire at? The lack of help is fine, but the amount of times I left these chests unopened is evidence of how much those hints helped. I just couldn't be bothered to stand around looking for a hidden torch that needed lighting up. I'm playing as Kratos, the god of war, for God's sake. I understand what Kratos was is not what Kratos is now, but it's something I haven't been able to fully get over in the transition to the Norse realms. While I love these new games, there's always a part of me deep down that can't understand why Kratos would waste time on anything that doesn't immediately get him closer to his end goal. In other words, I don't understand why Kratos would try to use his brain when he should be able to just use his muscles to rip the chest open. This mentality also applies to the side quests, although again, it's very much a personal issue. Again, I just don't see him doing all this. I see the characters like, let's go forward, let's get this shit done. And that's why, to me, the best way to play was to mainline the story and then go back to the side content. I'm not sure how many of you will feel the same as me, but yeah, that's just what I thought. If you're not like me, there's plenty of side quests for you to enjoy as a break from the main story or afterwards. There's also a bunch of souped up enemies and bosses just waiting around the world for you to find and destroy. And of course, collectibles return too, especially those pesky ravens Odin has control of. The point is, there's a lot to do outside of the main story, if it suits you. Probably an additional 15 hours of content. If you like the gameplay experience in God of War 2018, you're gonna thoroughly enjoy the offering here. It's just that simple. Some quick thoughts on the presentation before we wrap things up. God of War Ragnarok looks about as good as you'd expect for a first-party Sony exclusive. Believe it or not, it's gorgeous. It's a noticeable step up from its PS4 predecessor, but I don't think it can outpace other hard hitters like The Last of Us Part 2. This is perhaps due to the game being released on PS4 as well as PS5. I do wonder how much they could have pushed the graphics further if this was a PS5 exclusive, and it was built up for this current generation, but whatever. Regardless of that, the game is still plenty beautiful, combining an impressive amount of detail with rich colors, varied locations, and realistic features to reach that point. Perhaps most notable is how well realized the 9 realms are, each providing a different sort of atmosphere. Whether it's the snowy forest of Midgard, the lava-laden lands of Muspelheim, the serenity of Asgard, or the dense forest of Vanaheim. Each realm also features a rich color palette, which allows you to distinguish where you're at in an instant. At the same time, similar level layout and environmental objects are used across realms, which helps tie them all together. Going off of this, returning realms that we've been to before have brand new areas and layouts to explore, with very little in the way of repeated content. And the new realms, like Asgard, Svartalheim, and Vanaheim, each contain large areas to explore. Especially those last two. Those are probably the biggest realms in the game. It's really impressive what they've been able to build, especially considering very little is copy and pasted from the previous game, despite how easy and tempting it could have been to do that. There's just so many vistas that let you soak in the richness of this world, and I always love those. And if you take the time to look, you'll uncover an impressive amount of detail in just about every character and environmental object. It's for sure a gorgeous game from start to finish. In terms of music, I found this soundtrack to be quite impressive, although I do still prefer that of 2018's and those of the Greek adventures. Still, the music here feels right at home due to the deep bass vocals and the smart instrument choices. All of it feels very tense, like it's building to something big, which goes well with this story. My favorite would be the main theme, which shares its name with the title of the game. It just sounds like something from Vikings weekend at the Renaissance Fair, and I'm totally there for that. I enjoyed listening to some of it even outside of the game, and that's rare for me, so overall, a great soundtrack. Another nod needs to be given to the quality of the voice acting within this game. Good voice acting is something that's so easy to take for granted, but it needs to be mentioned here. Everyone did a fantastic job in this game, and I'm hoping to see that work awarded at the Game Awards later this year. Okay, it's funny that I just wrote that because I'm actually recording this while the Game Awards are taking place, and I'm pretty sure I just checked Twitter and saw that Christopher Judge won the award for Best Voice Actor. So I guess my prophecy came true. That makes one of us Ragnarok. Okay, that was a terrible joke, but regardless, the voice actors did a great job in this game, bringing the characters to life in ways not seen in the 2018 game. That being particularly true of the supporting cast. The main cast continues their excellence, while the supporting cast were given more to work with here, elevating them to prominence as well. A quick note on accessibility options, there's a lot, far more than in 2018. There's motion, visual, hearing, and motor options to tinker with to create a playstyle that's comfortable for you. As always, I'm not very dependent on any of these, but it's important to note their availability for those in need. I'm also happy to report that I didn't encounter any major bugs or glitches, including no hard crashes. The only hiccup of any sort was this one time where Angerboda froze up on the elevator for just a few moments. Besides that, nothing. My only real complaint towards the presentation work would probably be the menu layout. It's cluttered at times, especially when trying to access specific things like new runic attacks or weapon upgrades. This was but a minor annoyance, however, it's something I experienced in the previous game too, so I was hoping it would be cleaned up a bit here. Overall, just an impressive game visually with a killer soundtrack. Oh, and the people that were worried about Thor's character design before launch, fret not, he's awesome. For those of you expecting Chris Hemsworth, you'll adjust quickly, trust me, it's pretty good. I really hope this review has not undersold God of War Ragnarok, because I do think it's a better game than the 2018 title. The combat is right on par with the previous game, while the storytelling has been improved drastically. To me, the narrative was wonderfully paced, full of heart, took place on an epic scale, and didn't lose what made the previous title special. Meanwhile, the combat didn't really need a lot of changes, just adding a few more extra layers was enough. And the presentation was pretty flawless. Ragnarok is just another gold standard benchmark Sony first-party game, like Ghost of Tsushima a couple years back, or even Horizon Forbidden West earlier this year. It doesn't necessarily tread much new ground, and that's fine. It takes what the previous game establishes and makes it bigger and better. This title serves as a brilliant send-off to the Ghost of Sparta, if that ends up being the route Santa Monica Studios takes. I would love to see this team get a crack at a new IP, but I'm not sure Sony would be willing to let arguably their most important character be set aside at the height of his popularity and marketability. But that is the path I personally would root for. Playing as Atreus for a full game doesn't sound compelling to me. His sections in this game worked because of the high stakes and how they tied into Kratos' story, but on his own, I just don't find him that compelling. Meanwhile, this game ends with Kratos being revered as a god that many people look up to. It's a bit on the nose, I preferred the subtle implications from the ending of God of War 3, but still, he's in a good place. Ripping him out of the Norse lands to go fight other gods somewhere else would seem a bit cheesy, almost like a cash grab. They'd have to find a really compelling reason to continue his story. Like perhaps Atreus needing help in Egypt or some shit, I don't really know. The point is, I'm happy with Ragnarok. I'm happy to let this character rest because this game did him, Atreus, the Norse realms, and everything else in it justice. It's simply a brilliant sequel that delivered everything I wanted the previous game to. And they succeeded. It's amazing. It's a good game. Go play it. Thanks for watching. Hey everyone, that brings us to the end of another video. Given the magnitude of Ragnarok within the industry and how important this game was and how hyped it was and stuff, I'm surprised I didn't have more to say about it. I mean, I know this is by no means a short video, but I expected to have more words. However, I just don't. I don't have more words. I think the most interesting thing to talk about this game is its story, and we did that here a little bit. But yeah, I don't know. I really did love this game, don't get me wrong, but it just doesn't revolutionize the industry. It doesn't have a lot of talking points outside of the story, so I hope you understand. I'm sure other people will have 4-hour videos about this game, but for me, I just didn't feel compelled to write a lot about it, even though I did enjoy it immensely, and it will be a Game of the Year contender for me. I'd be interested to hear your thoughts in the comments below. In terms of the channel, I imagine this will be my last video for 2022 outside of the top 10 games video, which will either come in the last week of December or the first week of January. I really hope you enjoyed the content this year. I know I certainly had a lot of fun making it. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. Please leave a like if you enjoyed the video. Consider subscribing for more. Follow me on Twitter at NopNapNarp. Join our Discord, the link is below, and as always, have a nice day and take care.